Hi there, we're going to learn how a birth chart is interpreted. And the assumption for this tutorial video is that you have a knowledge of the basic concepts in astrology. You know what the symbols of the planets are. So for example, if I look at this chart wheel, this is a chart wheel of the great astrologer Rob Hand. You know, that you would know that this is Jupiter, and it's in the first house. This is the first house. He has Cancer rising. Jupiter's in Cancer. So you know the symbols, you know where the houses are, you know what the symbols of the planets are, and you know a little bit about rulerships. For example, Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. Those are the basic fundamentals of astrology. You know the symbols and a basic concept for each planet, for each sign, for each house, and you know about the rulerships. The sign that a planet rules, the opposite sign is its detriment, and then there's a sign of exaltation and fall. So you've got those basic concepts. Now what do you do with it? Okay, you've got that basic language. What order do you follow? How do you go about and put all this together? And that's what I'm going to describe in this video. So this is, by the way, part 3 of a 4-part series on an introduction to astrology, and you do not need to jump over back to parts 1 and 2 if you haven't watched them yet, as long as you know the basic language of astrology. Okay, now here's one way to do it. A lot of beginning astrologers like this, and even some more advanced astrologers do it, is they just go around the wheel. Start in the first house and just go around. So that's one approach. I'm going to show you several different approaches, some of the more common ones, and then I'll mention some of the less common ones. With Rob Hand's chart, we can look at the first house, which is how you present yourself to the world, how you come across. It's a very important house. The sign that's rising is very important. And he has Jupiter exalted in the sign of Cancer in the first house, indicating a strong presence, maybe a magnanimous personality, a larger-than-life kind of personality. So Jupiter's in the first house in Cancer, and it's good because Jupiter's exalted in Cancer. And what houses does Jupiter rule? Jupiter rules Sagittarius, so it rules the 6th house. If you use the classical rulers, it also rules the 10th house of career, indicating a big career and personal service. And then you go to the 2nd house and you say, okay, what's the deal with his money, his resources, his values? And you would say, well, Pluto's there, maybe some intense things will happen. We can also look at the part of fortune. This is the part of fortune using the ancient method. I'll make some videos more about the Arabic parts to deal with that specifically. But here's Pluto, and what planet is ruling the 2nd house? The Sun. It's also in the 6th house. So we're getting, and we have 3 planets in the 6th house. So a lot of emphasis on personal service. And you go around. 3rd house, writing, communication, North Node there, indicating that that's a good path for him. Neptune, some idealism, maybe some disappointment at home from that idealism. Mercury rules the 4th house. It's also in the 6th house. So some maybe he works from his home, for example, because Mercury is ruling this 4th house, because the cusp of the 4th house is in Virgo, and Mercury's there, so maybe he writes at home in an idealistic setting. So, you can go around and interpret each house, what's going on with creativity, children, and so on. Notice he has an intercepted sign in the 5th house. Scorpio is in the middle of the 5th house, not on any cusp. Libra is on the 5th house cusp, so Venus is ruling the 5th house. It's in the 6th house as well. And we have Moon and Mars indicating passion in Scorpio and motivation to be creative. So that's the idea. And what planet rules Scorpio? The modern ruler is Mars. The ancient ruler is Mars. Some people also use Pluto. If you just use Mars, it stays in the 5th house. Mars is in its own sign, indicating strong, passionate creativity. And so on. So that's the idea. Just go around what's going on with his work, his relationships, etc. You cover each area of life, what planets are in it, what planets rule the house, and you come up with your interpretation. So that's one way to do it. Just go around the houses. And again, see if any planets are in the house. Let me go back to this, just to review. See if any planets are in the house. What if there is no planet in the house? Does that mean there's nothing happening? There's nothing to say about relationships for Rob. He's got nothing in the 7th house. No, we go to the ruler. So you always have something to say. The ruler is Saturn. Ruler of Capricorn is Saturn. Where is Saturn? In the 12th, which is kind of a tricky place of sacrifice. So maybe he has to do, and Saturn, meaning maybe he has to give up and sacrifice in order to make his relationships work. And inevitably encounter some problems, might be an interpretation. So that's the art of interpretation. Different astrologers will come up with a different emphasis, a different way of seeing it, different possibilities, and it's the endless art of astrology, and that you can study forever. But what I want to emphasize here is the basic concept, that going around the houses is one way to do it. So here are my notes, and if you're a beginner, you would need some kind of software. In the second video in this series, I mentioned free software like the Cosmic Star Program that has interpretations of the planets and the signs and houses that would help give you some ideas. Even more intermediate and advanced astrologers sometimes like to read what other people say to inspire their thoughts about things. And some people actually use an interpretive report software that gives more extensive interpretation that you would have to purchase in order to get really detailed ideas from an astrologer that they really love, that they just love their work. Excuse me, they love these reports. And you can't always think off the top of your head what exactly are the implications of having Neptune and Libra in the 3rd house, or in the 4th house for Rob. So that can help trigger your insights and your ideas, and you can combine it with your own perceptions about it. And if you're talking to someone, then you get some feedback, and you can, relate it to the context of the situation. The Cosmic Patterns reports also include an online chart service. So if you have interpretive reports from Cosmic Pattern software, you can also offer those interpretations online for people to just come and get. So it's another way that you can provide interpretations if you like the interpretations in one of those interpretive reports. Okay, so what I'm discussing here is how you go about doing the interpretation and how you would deliver the interpretation, and what aids there are to help you with it. These interpretive reports can be helpful. Or you can have a book, the problem with the book is you have to keep flipping the pages, going back and forth to find the section you want, so a little more tedious. Okay, so that's one method, going around the houses. Okay, so once you learn the basic language of astrology, you can just go around the houses, apply the ideas, maybe get some insights from an interpretive report if that will help you. And there you go, you're on your way to giving interpretations. That's one way that it's done. I'm not necessarily recommending that. I'm not saying that I agree with those ideas. I'm telling you what is commonly done. In a few minutes, I'll give you some ideas of what I do when we get to that part of this tutorial. Now, second method. Some people don't like that method. They would prefer to focus on the things that are most important. And a lot of astrologers would say the sun, moon, and ascendant are most important. So why go around the wheel randomly finding things? Let's just jump right into what really counts. And what really counts, most important, everything counts, but most important might be the sun, moon, and ascendant. So we could see in Rob's case that the ruler of the ascendant is the moon. So there's a connection of the moon and the ascendant because the moon rules the ascendant, and also I'm noticing the moon at 13 Scorpio is trine the ascendant at 12 Cancer. We have an option in the software to draw aspect lines to the ascendant midheaven. It looks like that setting is off at the moment, so that line is not drawn. Well, just to show you, I'll just turn it on. I'm in the Sirius 2.0 software. I'm just going to right-click, click on Customize, and here's a little checkbox, aspects lines to ascendant midheaven. Boink, there it is. Now I see that moon trine ascendant. Also, I'm noticing there's actually what's going on here, a grand trine that I didn't notice until I drew this aspect lines in between Mars, Jupiter, and the 10th house cusp. Very interesting. 24 Cancer, 23 Scorpio, 21 Pisces. When I uncheck this, aspect lines to ascendant midheaven, see how that disappeared. One of the things I really like about this Sirius program and the Kepler program is this ability to interact. Maybe you don't want those lines in there because if the birth time's off a few minutes, you can't see them. So you can interactively just turn it on, and you can see the Mars, Jupiter, midheaven, grand trine. I'm going to uncheck it just to set it back to the way it was. Okay, so what was I saying? I was saying that a second method of interpreting the birth chart is to look at the sun, moon, and ascendant first. And here we notice the moon is ruling the ascendant, it's trine to the ascendant, putting a lot of emphasis on this moon in Scorpio in the 5th, trine the ascendant, some passionate feelings that he can express, deep insights, maybe psychoanalysis, you might say, or depth psychology, uncovering mysteries of the ancient world. Moon trine the ascendant might be one way to interpret it. Now notice, by the way, that knowing who Rob Hand is and knowing about something about his life, I can make sense of it. I'm putting emphasis on the Scorpio. If I didn't know the person, would I be able to come up with that? That, I don't know. For myself, I wouldn't. I mean, to be honest about it, I wouldn't necessarily see the qualities of Rob in terms of depth psychology or insights into ancient from the moon in Scorpio in the 5th, trine the ascendant. Maybe I should, but I wouldn't. I would be thinking about more personal, emotional things. So it's good to be honest. After the fact, we know who the person is, we can make sense out of it. But could we make sense out of it beforehand? You'd have to have a really, really good form of astrology to be able to do that. And so when you're learning astrology, it's good to think critically about what you're coming up with, and are you just rationalizing and finding meanings, or possibly the astrological influences have so many different ways they can express themselves that it's almost impossible to know beforehand. That's one view of astrologers. This is really big stuff I'm talking about, because this is what you find out when you talk to astrologers. Some say, I really can't tell you what you're like beforehand, but once I look at the chart and I know about you, I can put it all together. You see why they say that? Because it could be hard to know exactly what this would mean out of context, but in the context of the person's life, maybe it does really make sense. It can help you understand them. On the other hand, some people want a more definitive astrology, which is not so fuzzy with so many different possibilities. Some astrologers say they can do that, some say that they can't. So you see the range of ideas in astrology, that different people have different points of view. Now, at this point, I'm not taking sides. Don't shoot the messenger. This stuff gets controversial. I'm trying to let you know the different ways that professional astrologers approach the astrology chart and the different conclusions they come up with. So we see the moon in Scorpio in the 5th, trine the ascendant, and we can come up with certain meanings that relate to the life of Rob Hand. So we have the ascendant, and we talked about the Jupiter in the 1st house, and what that would mean. And then the sun is in the 6th, in Sagittarius. putting an emphasis on personal service, maybe the Sagittarius on a large scale, doing a personal service maybe for a lot of people or managing a large activity that has to do with some kind of personal service. And then we would look to see what house the sun rules. It rules the second house. So having some immediate effect on his money or his resources, or some people would say his values. So according to this second method of interpreting chart, we're going to look at all the details of what's going on with the sun, moon, and ascendant. Okay, you got it? First method, go around the houses. Second method for interpreting the chart, start with sun, moon, and ascendant and see where it leads you and what you come up with. And then you can go look at the other inner planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and then the outer planets. So the order is more by importance of the object, sun, moon, and ascendant, first, then Mercury, Venus, Mars, then Jupiter, Saturn, then Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And that doesn't mean that Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are not important. They are extremely important, but they're more transcendental, more impersonal, and they work differently. So it's just an order of interpreting the chart. So there are the two methods. One, go around the houses. Two, look at the sun, moon, and ascendant. And some experienced astrologers almost do this simultaneously. They look at the sun, moon, ascendant real quickly. They get some feelings about that. They notice, what houses are emphasized by having a lot of planets. And they kind of jump between the different ways of doing it. But if you're a beginner, you can try doing it step by step. Go around the houses is one way to think of it. Then you can also look at the sun, moon, and ascendant as a starting point. Now, question for you. I said the sun rules the second house because the second house cusp is 1 Leo. Would all astrologers agree with that? That the sun, well, all astrologers who use rulerships are going to agree that sun rules Leo. But is Leo necessarily on the second house cusp? Are we sure of that? Are we really sure of it? The answer is maybe not, because there are different house systems, and we're using Placidus houses. So one of the tricky areas of astrology is what house system you use. The different house systems will move these cusps around a little bit. I talk about that in the first video in this series. But I think you all are familiar with that. If I select, well, let's do it. Let's just try one other. I can also produce a listing, but let me just go here to settings, house system. What's a common? Regiomontanus is popular with some people. Let's see what it does. It moves the second house to 4 Leo, so we still have Leo on this cusp. But you get the idea. They're going to move around with different house systems. Okay, I'm just going to go back to Placidus, house system, Placidus. Okay, so you can do all that stuff interactively and just change it right there. All right, so we've learned two methods for interpreting the birth chart. One is go around the houses, and the other is look at the sun, moon, and ascendant. And when you look at the sun, moon, and ascendant, scan for themes. Be aware of themes. Here's a theme. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, and we see that Jupiter is emphasized because it's angular. It's in the first house. A planet in the first, 4th, 7th, or 10th houses, some astrologers feel is particularly important. So Neptune is strong in a way. Jupiter is strong, especially this first house, very strong. And Sun is in Sagittarius. And Jupiter rules Sagittarius. So you're getting this Sagittarius-Jupiter emphasis. You see that? A Sagittarius-Jupiter emphasis. Why? Because Jupiter is in the first, Sun, Mercury, and Venus are in Sag. So expansiveness, largeness is emphasized because you have Jupiter emphasized, you have Sagittarius emphasized. You also, as we noticed when we turned on those aspect lines, Jupiter's trine the midheaven. And there's a Mars-Jupiter midheaven grand trine. So Jupiter making that strong aspect, being part of a grand trine, means it's a very active planet. It's involved in a major astrological configuration. So a lot of emphasis on Jupiter's Sagittarian energy of largeness and expansiveness. Okay. So you look for themes, repeating things that repeat over and over again. And when you're looking for themes, there's generally no simple set of steps to finding themes. You just kind of notice them. Another theme would be Rob has Sun in the 6th house and Mercury and Venus, and they rule the 2nd house. The Moon is in the 5th with Mars ruling the ascendant, having 3 planets in the 6th and a planet in the 1st ruling the 6th indicates a strong 6th house. All right, so what I'm saying here is that he has 3 planets in the 6th house, right? So 6th house is really important. The Sun is in the 6th house. Mercury and Venus are in the 6th house. A lot of emphasis on personal service. And where is, we call the dispositor, the planet that rules the Sagittarius? In the 1st. Any planet in the 1st is emphasized, it's angular, it's in the house of how you present yourself to the world, how you come across. According to many astrologers, the ascendant is just very, very important, and so is the 1st house. So you're getting more emphasis on the 6th house because it's disposed by a planet in the 1st house, making that planet strong and important to you. That Jupiter's ruling all of these planets in the 6th house, putting a lot of energy into his personal service and how important it is to him to express it in a big way with his Jupiter in the 1st. So you just happen to notice these themes as you know the rulers inside and out, and it just like 2 + 2 = 4, you know that Jupiter rules Sagittarius. And if you use the ancient rulers, that Jupiter trine the midheaven, what's the midheaven? Pisces. What's the ancient ruler of Pisces? Jupiter. So the ruler of Pisces, using the ancient rulers, is Jupiter, and it trines it. This just creates a stronger theme, a stronger emphasis that ruler of the 10th is trining the 10th house. Just like his ruler of the ascendant is the moon trining the ascendant. That's good. These are 2 good things. This is going to give, this Jupiter trine the ascendant would give success in his ability to advance in career. He advanced in his career as a major astrologer from a relatively early age, maintained that very high position for many decades. It's an exalted Jupiter trine the midheaven. So these are the ways that you can interpret the chart, and when you know the rulerships inside and out, you'll notice these connections. So that's another way of interpreting the chart, looking at the Sun, Moon, and Ascendant, and noticing, when you just happen to notice a theme being emphasized. Okay. And the importance of dispositors. I just gave you some example of that. Rulerships are very important to many astrologers. Again, I want to emphasize, I'm not teaching you right now my way of interpreting. I'm teaching you how interpretation is normally and typically done, some of the fundamental concepts. Now let's look at rulerships. Let's take the Sun, because the Sun's so important. What planet disposes the Sun? Means what planet rules the sign that the Sun is in? Jupiter. What planet disposes Jupiter? The Moon rules Cancer. It's the Moon. The Moon is in Scorpio. If we use the ancient rulers, what planet disposes the Moon? The ruler of Scorpio is Mars. Mars disposes the Moon. What disposes Mars? Nothing. Mars is the end of the line. It's the final dispositor, it's often called, because it's in its own sign using the ancient rulers. So Mars is a final dispositor of the Sun, would also be the final dispositor of Mercury and Venus, because they're going to also be ruled by Jupiter. So it's going to go from Sag, these 3 planets in Sag, to Jupiter, to the Moon, to Mars. You follow that? So this chain. And so a lot of astrologers put a lot of emphasis on Mars as being very powerful, a force behind the chart, this Mars in Scorpio, because it's a final dispositor of several planets. Possibly all the planets. We can follow that and see, like, the ruler Saturn is disposed by Mercury, and we're back to the chain again. So it looks like Mars is probably the dispositor of all the traditional planets, it is, up through Saturn. it's the final dispositor. And maybe the others as well. It is of Uranus, because that goes to Mercury, Neptune, Pluto, of all of them, even Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Mars is the final dispositor, because Pluto is ruled by the Sun, and we're back to that same chain again. These are different ideas used by different astrologers. Not everyone emphasizes final dispositors, but most astrologers do put a lot of emphasis on rulerships. So that's how the interpretation is done. You just look at the planets, see what houses they're in, what signs they're in, and look at the rulerships and look at the aspects. Okay, a third method for interpreting the chart is to go directly to the strong aspects. Instead of going around the wheel, instead of looking at Sun, Moon, Ascendant, key right into the strong aspects, because some astrologers believe, after all is said and done, those strong aspects are what make you move. Do we have any strong aspects, say under a 1-degree orb, 3 degrees at most, Mars trine Jupiter, and the Sun-Mercury-Venus conjunction? So this Mars trine Jupiter is very, very important. So no matter which of these three systems you use, or assuming you use one of those three, you want to keep in mind the ingredients of all the three methods, no matter which one you use. Even if you like to go around the houses as your primary way, you want to keep in mind those strong aspects. So Mars trine Jupiter, achieving big things, would become a major, or is a major theme in his chart, major thing that's going on. And the Sun, Mercury, Venus, stellium, they're all about 2 degrees apart, all together there in the 6th house. He also has a Uranus trine Neptune. A lot of astrologers wouldn't emphasize that as much, even though it's very tight, because they're slow-moving planets. Others might say, well, it's important as an impact on generations and so on. There's different ways of thinking about it, but definitely the planets, an aspect involving an inner planet, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, or Mars, and to some extent also Jupiter and Saturn, is definitely important. So those are two major things, the Sun, Mercury, Venus together, and the Mars trine Jupiter. I could talk forever about the interpretation, but I want to give you the procedure. Okay, so you've got the procedure. Method number 3, focus on strong aspects. And obviously you can blend, as I was starting to hint at, you can blend all these together. You can focus on the strong aspects, you can focus, then think about the Sun, Moon, Ascendant, and then you can think about, gee, did I miss anything, and go around the wheel. So you can blend these ideas together if you want to. Some astrologers, honestly, don't even know how they go about and interpret a chart. They're intuitively jumping between these ideas without realizing it. For example, if suppose you drive to work in your car, maybe you don't, but just imagine you do, and maybe you drive a few miles, you don't think extremely consciously about the direction. You get in your car, you start it up, you start, turning here and turning there, and if you explain how to get there to somebody, you may have to give them, ideas of what sign or something to guide them, but you just do it instinctively. And for a lot of astrologers, it's instinctive, and they're sometimes not even able to explain very well what it is they're doing in a step-by-step approach, because it's become second-hand to them as they've explored ideas and it developed. So these 3 general methods are often what's going on with many astrologers. Now, those are 3 common approaches. However, keep in mind that some astrologers analyze other things, and some also do not emphasize or even use some of the ideas described so far. Okay? Very important point. Let me repeat that. I've gone over 3 basic ways to interpret the chart. Some professional astrologers don't use any of those 3 methods, and they don't even emphasize those concepts. They don't put emphasis on rulerships. There are astrologers who don't put much emphasis on houses. Some don't put much emphasis on signs. the majority do, but not all do. So this tutorial video is about how interpretations are done, and there are many ways that it's done. And this is important to know because often when you take a class or watch a video on how to learn astrology, they just start telling you things as if it's, the laws of Moses handed down. Here it is. This is how you do it. Look at the sun, moon, and ascendant. This is what the second house means. This is what the third house means. As if it was written in stone, when in reality, different astrologers do different things, and not all do it that way. So I'm giving you a more, you might say, academic or a slightly more objective view of how it's done and how different people go about and do it. So there are some astrologers, and they are the minority, who would emphasize minor aspects, things like septiles, noviles, quintiles, things called midpoint structures. They would put a lot of emphasis on asteroids and minor planets. Some put tremendous emphasis on degree meanings, some on fixed stars, some on Arabic parts. There are some astrologers who use mostly just minor aspects and midpoint structures, and don't use many of these other ideas as consider them to be fundamental at all. I know one of those people. It's me. So I'm an astrologer who puts most of my emphasis on minor aspects and midpoint structures, and some use other ideas. So there are different approaches. But these are less popular. Generally, people regard these as unimportant or of lesser importance. But people like me use that as the fundamental model. And if you choose a model, but you have to, it doesn't mean you think other models don't work. You just have to choose a model. You have to, if you play music, you're going to play a certain kind of music. If you're going to be a physician, you're going to focus, you'll be a general practitioner or a heart surgeon or whatever you are. You're going to do what fits you, works for you, and is right for you. So you pick a model and you work with it. Now, if you use some of these less common methods, you probably would need one of the software programs that you have to purchase. And these programs, usually people spend about $300. Program that I use, and I'm one of the developers of, is the Sirius program. And it's $550 in US dollars, so it's more expensive. Some people end up spending over $1,000 because they buy several programs, some even thousands because they start buying interpretive programs, and sometimes they also use it as part of their business. And there are programs like the Pegasus program, WinStar Express, which is under $100, which also gives you some of these features. And sometimes there are upgrade prices from a simpler program to a more advanced program. So if you're a beginner and you're wanting to do this stuff, you want to know what's required. And if you use the really basic ideas, you can just use one of the free online chart services. If you start using these other ideas, those free services may or may not prove to be adequate. If you start doing a lot of this stuff, they definitely won't be adequate. So that's the way that interpretation is done and the tools that are needed. If I was going to tell you how to build a house, I'd have to tell you have to have a hammer and a saw or some kind of equipment. Where do you get those? How much does it cost, etc.? How do you go about and do this stuff? If you're going to play a musical instrument, where do you get this instrument, and how do you actually go about and do it? So I'm trying to give you a perspective on how the interpretation is done and what the tools are that are available to make that possible. Now, I've gone over some of the basics of what we call Western astrology. There's Western astrology, and then there's Vedic astrology. Vedic astrology is astrology that is developed and widely used in India. One of the tutorial videos I have is an introduction to Vedic astrology. It's I would say, a unique introduction to Vedic astrology. You can watch that if you're interested in Vedic. The rules in Vedic astrology tend to be pretty different from those in Western astrology. And in Western astrology, I've mostly talked hear about a more modern approach, the next video in the series, part 4, is going to describe some different astrological systems to give you even a better idea on the different approaches to astrological interpretation. And I mentioned here that I practice, I use the minor aspects, I call it vibrational astrology. It's a form of what's called harmonic astrology, emphasizes minor aspects of midpoint structures, just to share my own personal approach. Every astrologer works differently. Now, important point. You cannot master all astrological systems. Just as no doctor masters all of medicine, no musician masters all styles of music, you're going to have to be content to focus on one or a few systems, just to tell you straight out. It's huge. Each one of these areas is huge with many, many different variations. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up with some advice on how to become a master of an astrological system. If you're a beginner to intermediate student, I've got some suggestions. And even if you're a pro, you might find this, a confident professional, you might find this interesting. Number 1, question the rules. This is just my own personal advice. Do not assume the rules work even if astrological authorities say they work. For example, does Rob Hand really have an emphasis on the 6th house? What do you think? The experts, are going to tell you their opinion, but you have to think for yourself. Does the final dispositor, Mars, in Scorpio, and the Moon, which is the ruler of the ascendant in the 5th house, does it really make sense? And how does it make sense? Does it describe the psychology, attitude, and behavior of Rob Hand? Does it describe his vocation? Does it describe his experiences? How does it work? And are we rationalizing? Are we making sense of it after the fact, after we know who we're talking about? Are we giving so many options for the astrological meaning that we can make sense of any chart? I think these are tough questions, and they're important questions. I've seen some students feel like they're confused, they're not getting anywhere, and partly it's because they're questioning, and sometimes the astrologer is only making sense after the fact. So think critically about it, not cynically and not naively. I think those two extremes, if you're a cynic and you say, oh, you can't prove that, that can't possibly be true, and you have this sort of negative attitude towards it all, it's hard to learn when you're fighting against what you're trying to learn. On the other hand, think about it critically, think about whether it's really making sense. Very, very important. I see a lot of people getting confused because they just assume the teacher knows everything, and if they don't see what the teacher sees, then they must be wrong. And maybe the student is sometimes questioning in a different way, or noticing weaknesses and issues that maybe the teacher isn't noticing. Now, number 2, if you can't get the rules to work, and you still like the system, so you intuitively feel this modern astrology should work, but I really am not seeing Rob Hand and Rob's chart, I'm not seeing yourself and your chart, or your spouse or your children or your parents and friends, it's really not working, maybe you need a teacher at this point. You want to find a teacher that has a valid system, and a teacher that you can question, doubt, and get clarification from. Not a teacher that's defensive about their system, or just not good at teaching it and explaining it. Maybe they're brilliant astrologers, but maybe they can't explain what they're doing. Sometimes you just need a teacher to gain that wisdom and that insight. Maybe you see another astrologer who just, you see that they can do it and you can't quite get there. Well, sometimes you just have to apprenticeship under somebody. And of course that's likely to cost money and time to do it, but in some cases it's necessary. Not for everybody, but I'm just telling you some advice depending on what you encounter. Some people learn very well on their own, taking a class here of, these free tutorial videos, etc., and it works out well. Number 3, don't be afraid of cognitive dissonance. Don't avoid it, and don't become overly upset about it. You can run into a lot of cognitive dissonance in astrology. Cognitive dissonance meaning, I thought that this would work, but it's not working. I thought it wouldn't work, but it does work. I thought this would only work psychologically, but it's actually telling me experiences in my life. Or I wanted an astrology that would tell me facts and figures so I know what stock to buy, and etc. And it's only giving me psychology. The astrology isn't necessarily what we assume it will be. So get ready for it. It happens to a lot of people in different ways. Don't be too afraid to have your worldview change. This is tied in with number 3. Maybe astrology works. Maybe it works in a manner that's different than what you expected. Maybe it doesn't work. So, there's some courage required to uncover the truth. There's a lot of defensiveness in astrology, both people that believe in it and people that are cynical of it. They have an a priori assumption. So if you want to learn it, go in with an open mind. Deal with the cognitive dissonance, things that don't seem to fit together. Try to sort through it, and find out what it is. It's often a surprising journey for many people. Some great astrologers, leading astrologers, started out writing papers for college or for their own interest to disprove astrology, and they ended up becoming astrologers. And so things like this can happen. Or sometimes people find out the astrology they thought worked actually doesn't work as well as they thought. Now, number 5, this is my own very personal thing. I doubt many astrologers agree with this or think it's that important. But take an interest in controlled research. I believe most astrologers depend mostly on their personal experience and the personal experience of others. Controlled research, exploratory research can bring fantastic insight. And this doesn't necessarily mean you're doing statistics. I have videos on extreme case sampling. It's fantastic. So this is something I think is personally important. I don't see many other astrologers emphasize it. And let me see, is this... okay, 2 more slides. Last thing on the advice. To develop a professional level of competency, focus on one particular astrological system. I've mentioned this before. Or perhaps integrate a few. You might end up jumping ship after you study one system in detail and decide some other system looks even better. Just go in, pick a system or a few systems at most, and don't diversify too much. You want to explore and see what systems are out there, but if you try to learn all the systems all at the same time, it gets very confusing, and I can hardly exaggerate the importance of this. I've got here at the bottom of this paragraph, I've seen many students study for many years and never feel confident as a professional because they become confused by knowing many astrological systems and not knowing which ones to use or how to resolve the differences of opinions and differences in techniques. So if you try to learn, I'll talk more about this in the next video, Hellenistic and classical, and I've mentioned a little bit about Vedic and various modern psychological and harmonics and midpoints. You learn a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and it's very difficult to assemble it to be able to practically use the information. There are exceptions to every rule, but I've seen this many, many times. Focus on a few systems and make sure you can actually put it to work if you want to be able to use the astrology and not just study it academically, but to be able to practically use it. So in the next video, part 4, I'm going to review the different astrological systems. And again, I'm not recommending that you attempt to become an expert in all these systems. If you want to be a practitioner of astrology, use it for your own personal use or use it professionally. But it's good to know what's out there, what the options are, and carefully choose which path you would start out on or continue your path on. I know a lot of people study astrology for 10 and 20 years and still feel like they're a beginner and decide, you know what, I need to take a fresh look at this, decide what path I want to follow in astrology, and really develop proficiency in it. Okay, my friends, I will shortly make this next video part 4 on the different astrological systems, and my hope is that in this 4-part series on Introduction to Astrology, you've gotten a good idea of what the basic concepts of astrology are, how you can go about practicing astrology and using astrology, and some ideas on the methods that are available for putting the information to interpret the astrology chart. And then, of course, I have many dozens of videos, and there are, of course, lots of other resources to continue your studies with more advanced topics. Thank you very much for listening. God bless. Namaste.